The mountains of Vexor Prime were not like any mountains on Earth. They rose straight up from the ground like broken teeth, their peaks disappearing into clouds of toxic gas. There were no gentle slopes, no gradual ascents. There was only vertical rock and thin air and the constant threat of death. Katie began climbing on the morning of day 4. Her body had already been pushed past its limits in the swamps. Now it was being asked to do the impossible. The first problem was the air. At sea level on Earth, air contained about 21% oxygen. Here, at the equivalent of 23,000 feet, it dropped to less than 8%. For most species, this was uncomfortable but manageable. For humans, it was potentially lethal. Katie felt the effects almost immediately. Her vision blurred at the edges. Her thoughts became slow and confused, like trying to think through thick mud. Every few steps, she had to stop and force herself to take deep, deliberate breaths. At the observation post, the instructors watched her vital signs on their holographic displays. The human's oxygen saturation is dropping, Instructor Thrall noted. 78%, 76, 74. She will tap out within the hour, Vaxis predicted. Her brain is not getting enough oxygen. She will become confused, then unconscious, then dead. Garrick said nothing. He zoomed in on Katie's video feed and watched. She had stopped moving. She was bent over with her hands on her knees, her whole body shaking. Her lips were turning blue. This was it, Thrall thought. This was where the human finally gave up. Then Katie reached into her pack. She pulled out a small device, pressed it against her neck, and injected something into her bloodstream. What is that? Vaxis asked. Garrick enlarged the image. A hypoxia treatment. Standard issue for human high-altitude operations. It increases oxygen absorption in the blood. She planned for this, Thrall said slowly. She knew this would be the danger zone for her species, and she came prepared. Yes, Garrick said. She did. Katie resumed climbing. Her pace was agonizing. What the Kovathi recruits accomplished in minutes took her hours. But she did not stop. When her legs gave out, she crawled. When crawling became too difficult, she pulled herself forward with her arms. Celine had moved ahead at Katie's insistence. There was no point in both of them suffering through the slow ascent. The Gorvathi's 8 limbs were perfectly suited for climbing, and she could cover ground that would take Katie a full day in just a few hours. But when Katie finally pulled herself over the top of the first major peak, gasping and shaking, she found Celine waiting for her. "You are the most stubborn creature I have ever encountered," Celine said. "Thank you," Katie wheezed. It was not entirely a compliment. They rested briefly on the narrow ledge. Katie looked back the way she had come. The swamps were far below now, just a yellow smear on the red landscape. She could see the beacons of fallen recruits flashing like stars. "How many have tapped out?" she asked. 19. Plus 5 dead. Celine paused. "You are now in the top half of remaining recruits." Katie laughed, which hurt her chest. "The top half. Great. Only had to almost die a dozen times to get there. The mountain phase is not over. The worst is still ahead." She was right. The second peak was taller than the first, and the third was taller still. The air got thinner with each climb. The temperature dropped from merely cold to absolutely deadly, and the route became more treacherous, with loose rocks and sudden drops in ice that could send you sliding to your death. Night fell when Katie was halfway up the second peak. The temperature plunged to -40 degrees. At that temperature, exposed skin could freeze in minutes. Unprotected lungs could be damaged by each breath. The alien recruits huddled together for warmth. Their various biologies gave them advantages Katie did not have. The Laxians could slow their heart rates and enter a semi-hibernation state. Kovathi could cluster their bodies together like insects, sharing heat efficiently. Draxians had thick hides that insulated them against the cold. Katie had none of these advantages. She was a small, warm-blooded mammal on a frozen mountain in the middle of an alien hellscape. She built a shelter from her emergency thermal blankets, anchoring them to the rock with climbing spikes. It was not much, just a small pocket of trapped air, but it raised the temperature enough to keep her from dying immediately. She crawled inside her sleeping bag and curled into the smallest ball possible, trying to conserve every bit of body heat. She did not sleep. She could not sleep. The cold was too intense, the fear too present. She lay there shivering, watching. Her breath crystallized in the air, counting the hours until dawn. Sometime around midnight, she heard a sound outside her shelter, a scraping, like something being dragged across rock. Then a thud, and then silence. In the morning, she found out what it was. A Draxian recruit had wandered too close to a loose section of ledge. The rock had given way, and he had fallen 3,000 feet to his death. His body was now somewhere at the base of the mountain, frozen and broken. Katie stared down at where he had fallen. She could not see the body from here, but she could imagine it. Another being who had come here believing in his own strength, now dead because this place did not care about strength. She thought about tapping out. The beacon was right there on her pack. One press, and this would all be over. She could be warm and safe within hours. She could go home and forget any of this had ever happened. Her hand moved toward the beacon. Then she stopped. She thought about Instructor Thrall, counting his winnings. She thought about Vaxis, laughing about the stupid human who could not even last 30 minutes. She thought about every alien who had looked at her and seen something small and weak and worthless. She thought about her father, who had kept fighting even when the doctors told him to give up. She thought about her grandmother, who had worked 12-hour shifts in a factory while pregnant. She thought about every human who had ever been told they could not do something and had done it anyway. "Not yet," she whispered to herself. Her voice was barely audible, rough from the cold and the thin air. Not yet. She crawled out of her shelter and started climbing. The second peak nearly killed her. The third peak nearly killed her twice. Her body ran out of reserves and started eating itself, consuming muscle for energy. Her fingers and toes went numb and then started to hurt, which was somehow worse. Her lungs burned with every breath, but she kept climbing. Celine appeared beside her on the morning of day 5 as Katie pulled herself over the final peak. The Kovathi looked at her with something that might have been respect. "You should be dead," Celine said. "Probably. Your species is not designed for this environment. Your biology is wrong. Your body is too small and too fragile." "I know. And yet here you are." Katie looked out at the landscape below. The mountains were behind her now. Ahead, the volcanic fields glowed orange and red, stretching to the horizon. The final challenge. The crucible. She was almost done. She was almost there. "Here I am," she said. Then her legs gave out and she collapsed onto the frozen rock, unconscious before she hit the ground. Celine caught her before she could roll off the ledge. She held the small human in her limbs and looked down at her face, pale and still. For a long moment, Celine considered pressing Katie's beacon. It would be a mercy. The human had proven her point. She had survived the swamps and the mountains. No one would blame her for tapping out now. But then Katie's eyes opened. They were unfocused, confused, but still fighting. "Not yet," Katie whispered. "Not yet." Celine helped her sit up. She gave her water and food and watched as color slowly returned to her face. "You are insane," Celine said. "Probably. The crucible will be worse than the mountains. I know. You might actually die." Katie looked at the volcanic fields glowing in the distance. She thought about everything she had already survived. She thought about everything still ahead. "Then I will die moving forward," she said. and when her legs could hold her again, she stood up and started walking toward the fire. The Galactic Alliance Training Academy sat on a dead world called Vexor Prime. The planet had no life of its own. It was all red rock and poisonous air, an endless desert. The Alliance had chosen it for exactly this reason. If you could survive training here, you could survive anywhere. Commander Zorath stood at the main observation window, watching the transport ship descend through the orange clouds. He was a Valaxian, 8 feet tall, covered in scales as black as deep space. He had 4 eyes, 2 on each side of his head, and they could see in every direction at once. He had trained soldiers for 40 years. He had seen every species in the galaxy attempt his courses. Most failed. Many died. New recruits arriving, said Instructor Thrall, walking up beside him. Thrall was also Valaxian, but younger, with blue-green scales that showed his inexperience. I reviewed the manifest. Mostly Draxians and Korvathi this cycle. A few Valaxians. And 1 human. Zorath's 4 eyes blinked slowly. A human? Here? A female human, Commander. From Earth, she volunteered for the Crimson Gauntlet. The Crimson Gauntlet was the most difficult training course in the known galaxy. It stretched across 300 miles of the worst terrain Vexor Prime had to offer. Acid swamps that could dissolve flesh in seconds. Mountains so high that the air became too thin to breathe. Volcanic fields where the ground could open up and swallow you whole. The course took 6 days to complete. 1 in 4 recruits died attempting it. No human had ever tried. She will outlast, Zorath said. Humans are too fragile. I agree, Commander. I was thinking of starting a small wager among the instructors. For entertainment purposes. Zorath considered this. It was against regulations, strictly speaking. But regulations existed far away, and Vexor Prime made its own rules. What are the terms? How long before she taps out? I am betting 3 hours. Menor Vaxes, who had been listening from across the room, let out a clicking laugh. He was a Korvathi, an insect-like species with 8 limbs and compound eyes that could see heat signatures. 3 hours is generous. I give her 30 minutes. She will see the swamps and run crying for the transport. Only senior drill instructor Garrick stayed quiet. He was the oldest instructor at the academy, a scarred veteran who had fought in the Outer Rim Wars. Half his face was burned away from a plasma blast. He had seen things that would drive most beings insane. You are not joining the wager? Thrall asked him. I served with humans during the war, Garrick said slowly. I watched one of them carry a wounded soldier for 30 miles with a broken leg. I saw a human pilot crash her ship into an enemy vessel rather than be captured. He paused. I will bet 20 credits that she finishes the course. Thrall and Vaxes laughed. Even Zorath allowed himself a small smile. Your credits, old friend, Thrall said. Your loss. The transport landed, and the recruits filed out onto the red dirt of Vexor Prime. There were 47 of them in total. Draxians stood 7 feet tall, their bodies covered in thick armor like hide that could stop a blade. Korvathi moved on 8 legs, fast and precise, their compound eyes taking in everything at once. The Laxians towered over everyone. Their cold-blooded bodies adapted to extreme temperatures. And then there was Katie Morgan. She stood 5 feet 4 inches tall. She weighed 120 pounds. Her brown hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and her green eyes moved across the landscape with calm focus. Among these alien giants, she looked like a child standing among adults, but she did not look afraid. Katie had grown up in a small town in Texas. Her father, Danny Morgan, had been a soldier. He served 3 tours in Afghanistan before coming home with a bad leg and a head full of nightmares. He taught Katie 2 things before he died. First, that pain was temporary, but quitting lasted forever. Second, that the only person who could decide her limits was herself. She joined the Marines at 18. She was the smallest person in her unit and the only woman in her infantry squad. The men had bet she would wash out in the first week. She graduated top of her class. They bet she would never see combat. She deployed 3 times and earned a Purple Heart for taking a bullet while dragging a wounded soldier to safety. Now she was here, on an alien world, attempting a course that no human had ever tried. The recruits gathered in the orientation hall, a huge building carved directly into the rock. Commander Zorath stood on a raised platform, looking down at them with his 4 unblinking eyes. "You are here because you believe you are strong," he said. His voice echoed off the stone walls. "You are wrong. You are weak. You are soft. You are unprepared for what awaits you." He pressed a button, and a holographic image appeared behind him. It showed the Crimson Gauntlet in all its horror. Recruits gasped. One Draxian actually stepped backward. "This course will take 6 standard days to complete," Zorath continued. "You will carry everything you need. There will be no resupply, no rescue, no mercy. If you cannot continue, you will press the beacon on your pack. A transport will collect you, and you will be marked as a failure for the rest of your life." He paused, and his eyes found Katie in the crowd. "Some of you will not survive. This is by design. The galaxy does not need soldiers who cannot endure. It needs warriors who will keep fighting when their bodies beg them to stop. It needs beings who would rather die than surrender." Katie felt the weight of his gaze. She felt the stares of the alien recruits around her. She knew what they were thinking. The little human would tap out first. The little human would probably die. The little human had no business being here. She had heard these things her whole life. They no longer bothered her. That night, she sat in her assigned quarters with her bunkmate, a Kovathi named Celine. Unlike the others, Celine seemed more curious than dismissive. "You know about the Crimson Gauntlet?" Celine asked. "The real details, not just a briefing?" "I know enough. The acid swamps alone have killed 17 recruits in the last 10 years. The mountain phase has broken species twice your size. The volcanic fields at the end have claimed even more." Celine paused. "Why would you volunteer for this?" Katie thought about her father, who had kept fighting even when the doctors told him his leg would never work again. She thought about her grandmother, Betty Morgan, who had worked in a weapons factory during World War II while pregnant. She thought about every person who had ever been told they were too small, too weak, too female, too human. "Because someone has to be first," she said. Celine studied her with compound eyes that reflected the dim light. "You are either very brave or very foolish." "Probably both," Katie admitted. The next morning, the recruits gathered at the entrance to the Crimson Gauntlet. The red landscape stretched before them, a nightmare made real. In the distance, acid swamps bubbled and hissed. Beyond them, mountains rose into toxic clouds. And beyond the mountains, the volcanic fields glowed orange against the sky. Katie adjusted her pack. It weighed almost as much as she did. Her body was already protesting, and she had not taken a single step. Commander Zorath raised his hand. "Begin." The recruits surged forward like a wave. Draxians charged ahead with their powerful legs. Kovathi scattered across multiple paths, their 8 limbs carrying them with terrifying speed. Valaxians moved in disciplined groups, conserving energy for the long journey ahead. Katie took a single deep breath. Then she started walking. Behind her, at the observation post, Instructor Thrall smiled and checked his timepiece. "The clock starts now," he said. 3 hours, and I collect my winnings." Garrick said nothing. He just watched the small human figure grow smaller and smaller against the red horizon, still moving, still fighting, refusing to stop. The acid swamps of Vexor Prime stretched for 50 miles in every direction. They were not like the swamps on Earth. There was no green, no life, no sound of insects or birds. There was only bubbling yellow liquid that could eat through metal, thick fog that burned the lungs, and ground that could swallow you whole if you stepped in the wrong place. Katie had been walking for 18 hours. Her legs had stopped hurting around hour 10. Now they just felt numb, like they belonged to someone else. Her pack straps had cut grooves into her shoulders that would probably leave scars. Every breath felt like swallowing fire, but she kept moving. 3 recruits had already tapped out on the first day. A Draxian had broken his leg on the initial rock scramble leading down to the swamps. His screams had echoed across the valley as the bone tore through his thick hide. 2 Veluxians had collapsed from heat exhaustion. Their cold-blooded bodies could not handle the swamp's humidity, and their internal temperatures had risen until their organs began to fail. Katie had passed their beacons, flashing red in the fog, waiting for the extraction transport to collect them. She was not going to be one of them. The path through the swamps required constant attention. One wrong step meant falling into an acid pool. The yellow liquid looked almost peaceful from a distance, but Katie had seen what it could do. A Kovathi recruit had stumbled earlier that day, his leg going into the acid up to the knee. The screaming had lasted for 3 minutes before he finally hit his beacon. When the transport arrived, there was nothing left below his knee but bone. Katie moved slowly, testing each step before putting her weight down. The alien recruits complained about her pace. They said she was holding everyone back. They said she should just tap out now and save everyone the trouble. She ignored them and kept testing each step. Celine stayed with her. This surprised Katie. The Kovathi could have easily moved ahead with the others. Her 8 limbs let her spread her way across multiple surfaces, making the swamp much easier to navigate. But she matched Katie's pace, step for careful step. "You should go on," Katie said on the second day. Her voice was rough from the acid air. "I am slowing you down." "Kovathi do not abandon packmates," Salim replied. "It is not our way. I am not your packmate. I am just some stupid human who signed up for something she cannot finish. Are you planning to tap out?" Katie thought about it. Her body was screaming at her to stop. Her feet were covered in blisters that had popped and reformed and popped again. Her lungs burned with every breath. She had not slept more than 2 hours since the course began. "No," she said. "I am not planning to tap out." "Then you are my packmate, and I will not leave you." They made camp that night on a rare patch of solid ground. Katie peeled off her boots and looked at her feet. They were a mess of blood and pus and raw skin. She cleaned them as best she could with her medical supplies, biting her lip to keep from crying out. Celine watched her with those strange compound eyes. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why do humans do this to themselves?" "I have studied your species. You have no natural armor, no poison, no claws, no exceptional strength or speed. You are among the weakest intelligent species in the galaxy. Yet you keep attempting things that should kill you." Katie wrapped her feet in fresh bandages while she considered the question. "I think it is because we know we are fragile," she finally said. "We know how easily we can break. So we spend our whole lives trying to prove that we are more than our bodies. That willpower can overcome biology. That seems exhausting." "It is." Katie laughed, though it hurt her chest. "But it is also the only thing that has kept us alive as a species. We could not outrun the predators on our planet, so we learned to outlast them. We could not fight them with claws or teeth, so we built weapons. We could not survive cold climates, so we invented fire and clothing." She looked up at the alien sky, so different from the one she had grown up under. Every limitation became a problem to solve. Every time a universe told us we could not do something, we found a way to do it anyway. I guess stubbornness is just coded into our DNA at this point. Celine was quiet for a long moment. Your species is strange, I know, but also impressive in a disturbing way. Thank you. I think the next morning brought more horror. They found the bodies of 2 recruits who had wandered off the path during the night. The acid had taken them completely. Only their beacons remained, sitting in pools of yellow liquid, still flashing USELESSLY. Katie stared at the pools for a long moment. That could have been her. That could still be her. She started walking. The fog grew thicker as they moved deeper into the swamps. Katie could barely see 10 feet in front of her. She relied on her compass and her instincts, both of which felt inadequate for the task. Around noon on the 3rd day, disaster struck. The ground gave way beneath her feet without warning. One moment she was walking on solid earth. The next, she was falling into darkness. She grabbed at the edge of the hole, her fingers digging into mud and rock, her legs dangling over nothing below her. She could hear the hiss and bubble of acid. Celine! She screamed. The Kohathi was at her side in an instant. 4 of her limbs grabbed Katie's arms while the other 4 anchored to the ground. She pulled with strength that seemed impossible for her thin frame. Katie came up out of the hole inch by inch. The acid below splashed against her boots, and she could feel the heat through the material. If Celine lost her grip, if the ground gave way further, she was dead. But Celine did not lose her grip. She pulled until Katie was clear of the hole, then dragged her another 10 feet for good measure. They lay there in the fog, both breathing hard. Thank you, Katie gasped. You would have done the same for me. Katie was not sure if that was true. She hoped it was. She wanted to believe she was the kind of person who would risk everything to save another being, even an alien she had known for only 3 days. Why did you save me? She asked. Really? The truth. Celine's compound eyes reflected the dim light filtering through the fog. Because I have been watching you since the course began. The other recruits rush ahead without thinking. They make mistakes. They fall into acid pools and break their legs and tap out crying. But you think before every step. You move slow because you are being careful, not because you are weak. She paused. I believe you will finish this course. I have never believed that about a human before. I want to see if I'm right. Katie did not know what to say. So she just got to her feet, checked her compass, and started walking again. The end of the swamps came on the 4th day. Katie dragged herself out of the fog and onto solid rock, her body shaking with exhaustion and relief. Behind her, the yellow pools bubbled and hissed, claiming 2 more recruits who had not been careful enough. Ahead of her, the mountains rose into the toxic clouds, impossibly tall. Impossibly steep. Katie looked at them and felt her heart sink. She was already destroyed from the swamps. The mountains would be worse. The mountains would probably kill her. But somewhere back at the observation post, Instructor Threll was counting his winnings early. Somewhere back there, aliens were laughing at the stupid human who thought she could do the impossible. Katie took a deep breath of the thin, cold air. Then she started climbing. The Crucible was the final test. A 20-mile forced march through volcanic terrain, carrying double pack weight in full combat gear. Most species completed it in 8 to 10 hours. The course record was 6 hours and 12 minutes, held by a Valagian Special Forces operative who had trained his entire life for moments like this. Katie began the march on the morning of day 5. She had barely slept in 4 days. Her body had consumed its fat reserves and was now eating its own muscle for fuel. Her feet were so damaged that every step felt like walking on broken glass. Her lungs had been scarred by the acid air of the swamps and the thin atmosphere of the mountains. She was not going to finish in 8 hours. She was not sure she could finish at all, but she strapped on the extra weight and started walking. The volcanic fields were unlike anything on Earth. Geysers of superheated steam erupted without warning, sending columns of boiling water 100 feet into the air. Rivers of magma crisscrossed the landscape, forcing constant detours. The ground itself was unstable, prone to sudden collapses into underground caverns filled with toxic gas. The heat was unbearable. The temperature on the surface reached 140 degrees. The alien recruits had various ways of dealing with this. Valaxians actually seemed to enjoy it, their cold-blooded bodies soaking up the warmth. Kovathi could seal their breathing passages against the toxic fumes. Draxian's thick hide protected them from the worst of the heat. Katie had nothing except her own stubbornness. By hour 3, she was severely dehydrated. She had brought water, but in this heat, it was never enough. Her body was sweating constantly, trying to cool itself, losing fluid faster than she could replace it. By hour 6, she was hallucinating. She saw her father walking beside her, telling her stories about his time in the military. She saw her grandmother, who had died when Katie was 12, offering her fresh-baked cookies. "You need to keep going, sweetheart," her grandmother said. "You are almost there." "I cannot," Katie whispered. "I cannot do this anymore." "Yes, you can. You always could. You just need to remember why you started." Katie tried to remember. It seemed so far away now, that moment when she had decided to come to Vexor Prime. Had she been trying to prove something? Had she been running from something? Had she just been too stubborn to admit that some challenges were beyond her? She did not know anymore. She only knew that she was still moving, one foot in front of the other. Through fire and gas and burning rock. Silene found her at hour 8. The Kovathi had finished the march hours ago, her time a respectable 9 hours and 43 minutes. But she had come back to look for Katie. "You need to stop," Selene said. "Your vital signs are critical. If you continue, you may die." "Cannot stop," Katie said. Her voice was barely recognizable, rough and broken. "Not done yet. You have proven yourself. No one will think less of you if you tap out now. I will think less of me." Selene stared at her, trying to understand. This was not rational behavior. Katie's body was failing. Her brain was not getting enough oxygen or water. Every medical indicator said she should stop, should rest, should let the transport come and take her to safety. But she kept walking. At hour 12, Katie collapsed. She fell face first into the volcanic ash and lay there, unable to make her body obey her commands. The finish line was still 8 miles away. The instructors watched on their monitors. Thrall was already calculating his winnings. Vaxes was shaking his head, disappointed that the human had not even provided good entertainment. Only, Garrett kept watching. And then Katie moved. It was not walking. It was not even crawling. She dragged herself forward, one arm at a time, her legs trailing uselessly behind her. Her fingers dug into the hot ash, pulling her body inch by inch across the ground. "What is she doing?" Vaxes asked. "Refusing to quit," Garrick said quietly. "One arm, then the other, inches at a time." The ground scraped against her uniform, tearing the fabric, scraping her skin raw. Blood mixed with ash and sweat. Her breathing was ragged, the sound of a body pushed past all reasonable limits. Selene walked beside her. She offered water, which Katie accepted. She offered to carry her, which Katie refused. "Why?" Selene finally asked. "Why do this to yourself? What could possibly be worth this much suffering?" Katie's voice was barely a whisper. It took all her remaining strength just to form words. "Because every time someone tells me I cannot do something, every time someone bets against me, every time someone looks at me and sees a limitation, I have to prove them wrong. Not for them, for me. For every human who ever heard no and decided it was just the first word in a longer sentence." She pulled herself forward another inch. I cannot make my body stronger. I cannot change my biology. I cannot become something I am not. But I can refuse to quit. I can keep moving when everything tells me to stop. That is the one thing I can control. The one thing that is truly mine. Hour 14 passed. Hour 16. Hour 18. The sun set and rose again, and Katie was still dragging herself forward. Her body had stopped working properly. Her vision was nearly gone, reduced to blurry shapes and colors. Her arms moved by instinct now, not conscious thought. Her mind had retreated to some deep place where pain could not reach, where there was nothing but forward motion and the absolute refusal to surrender. Other recruits passed her. Some stopped to stare. A Draxian actually laughed at the sight of the small human crawling through the ash like a wounded animal. But most just watched in silence, something like awe in their alien eyes. This was not supposed to be possible. Humans were weak. Humans were fragile. Humans did not belong in places like this, attempting challenges like this. Yet here was a human, broken and bleeding and barely conscious, still moving forward. At hour 22. Celine stopped walking beside her and knelt down instead. The finish line is close, she said. Less than 2 miles. Katie did not respond. She was not sure she could form words anymore. I will not carry you, Celine said. I know you do not want that. But I will stay with you until the end. Whatever that end is. Katie's hand reached forward, grabbed the ground, pulled one arm, then the other. Inch by inch, the other recruits who had finished gathered at the end point. Word had spread through the camp about the human who would not quit. They stood in silence, watching her slow progress across the volcanic field. Commander Zorth was there too. He had left the observation post to see this for himself. In 40 years of training soldiers, he had never seen anything like it. Hour 24. Hour 20-5. The sun set again. Someone brought lights so they could see her progress in the darkness. And still she crawled. At hour 26. Katie Morgan's hand crossed the finish line of the Crimson Gauntlet. She was barely conscious. Her body was covered in blood and burns and ash. She had broken 3 fingers on her right hand from the constant dragging. She had lost 15 pounds in 6 days, but she had finished. The medics rushed forward immediately. They lifted her onto a stretcher and began emergency treatment. Her vital signs were critical. There was a real chance she might still die from her injuries. But she had finished, and in that moment, watching the small broken human being carried away to the medical bay, something changed in the way the aliens looked at humanity. They had thought humans were weak. They had been wrong. They had thought humans were prey. They had been wrong. They had thought humans would break when pushed too far. They had never been more wrong about anything in their lives. Katie woke up in the medical bay 3 days later. The room was white and clean, so different from the red dust and volcanic ash that had been her world for the past week. Machines beeped quietly around her, monitoring her vital signs, pumping fluids and medication into her broken body. She tried to move and immediately regretted it. Every part of her hurt. Her arms were wrapped in bandages from the burns and scrapes. Her feet were encased in healing gel. Her ribs ached with each breath, but she was alive. And she had finished. A nurse came in, a Valaxian female with gentle eyes. You are awake. Good. The commander wishes to speak with you. Can he wait until I can feel my legs again? The nurse made a sound that might have been a laugh. I will let him know you need more time. But Zorth came anyway, later that same day. He stood at the foot of her bed. All 8 feet of him, his 4 eyes studying her like she was some strange new species he had never encountered before. You should have tapped out. He sighed. Probably, she agreed. Your completion time was the slowest in the history of the Crimson Gauntlet, by a significant margin. 26 hours for a course that most complete in less than 10, I figured. You have also become the first human to complete it, the first female of any species in the past decade. And your refusal to quit has become something of a legend among the recruits. Katie did not know what to say to that. She had not been trying to become a legend. She had just been trying to finish. Zorath continued. I have been training soldiers for 40 standard years. I have seen strength in many forms: speed, power, endurance, tactical intelligence. But I have never seen anything quite like what you demonstrated on that course. He paused, and his 4 eyes blinked slowly. I do not fully understand humans. Your species is physically unremarkable by galactic standards. You are small. You are fragile. You lack natural weapons or armor. By all measures, you should be prey, not predators. Yet everywhere you go, you find ways to exceed expectations. It is disconcerting. Katie smiled weakly. We are too stupid to know when we are beaten. No, I think it is something else. I think your species has learned to weaponize suffering. You embrace pain that would break others because you have reframed it as something other than pain. A challenge. A test. A story to tell. He leaned closer, his voice dropping. The galaxy has been watching humanity since you achieved interstellar travel. Most species dismissed you as irrelevant. Too weak, too primitive, too limited to matter in the grand scheme of things. But I think they are wrong. I think the galaxy is not ready for humans. He straightened up and turned to leave. At the door, he paused. Rest well, recruit. When you are healed, there will be more challenges waiting. The Crimson Gauntlet was just the beginning. After he left, Celine came to visit. She moved quietly on her 8 legs, carrying something small in her upper limbs. How are you feeling? She asked. Like I was chewed up and spit out by something very large and very angry. That is accurate to what happened from a certain point of view. Katie laughed, then winced as her ribs protested. Thank you for staying with me, for not letting me die alone out there. You would not have died. You are too stubborn to die. I might have. If you had not been there, I might have given up. Celine considered this. I do not think so, but I am glad I could help. She held out the object she had been carrying. It was a small token, carved from something like bone, inscribed with symbols Katie could not read. This is a Kovathi honor token, Celine explained. It is given to warriors who have proven themselves in battle. Among my people, you would now be considered a full warrior, equal to any Kovathi who has faced death and survived. Katie took the token. It was warm from Celine's body heat, smooth from years of handling. I thought Kovathi did not respect humans, she said. We did not. We were wrong. Celine's compound eyes reflected the light. I have been thinking about what you said in the swamps. About how humans embrace pain because you know you are fragile. About how every limitation becomes a problem to solve. She paused. I think that is the most terrifying thing I have ever heard. A species that treats its own weakness as fuel for growth. A species that refuses to accept any limit as permanent. The galaxy has faced many dangers over the millennia. Wars, plagues, natural disasters. But I do not think it has ever faced anything quite like humanity. Katie did not know how to respond to that. It sounded like a compliment, but it also sounded like a warning. We are not that scary, she said. Yes, Celine replied. You are. You just do not know it yet. The recovery took 2 weeks. Katie spent the time learning to walk again, rebuilding the muscle she had lost, letting her body heal from injuries that should have killed her. Word of what she had done spread through the academy and then beyond. Other training facilities heard about the human who had crawled across the finish line. Military commanders from a dozen species requested copies of her file. News outlets ran stories about the first human to complete the Crimson Gauntlet. Katie did not pay much attention to any of it. She was too busy preparing for whatever came next. On the day she was released from the medical bay, she found a crowd waiting outside. Recruits from a dozen species stood at attention, watching as she emerged on unsteady legs. No one spoke. They simply stood there, silent and respectful, as she passed. She found Instructor Thrall near the back of the crowd. He looked uncomfortable, like a man who had lost a bet he had been sure of winning. 20 credits, he said quietly, pressing the payment chip into her hand. Garrick asked me to give this to you. He won it fair and square. Katie looked at the chip. 20 credits was not much money in the grand scheme of things, but it represented something far more valuable. It represented proof that she had done what everyone said was impossible. She found Garrick in the observation post, watching the next batch of recruits prepare for their own attempt at the gauntlet. He did not look surprised to see her. "You should be resting," he said. "I have rested enough." He nodded slowly. "I knew you would finish. From the moment I saw your file, I knew." "How?" "Because I have served with humans. I have seen what you can do when pushed. You do not fight like other species. You fight like you have nothing to lose and everything to prove. It is terrifying and beautiful at the same time." He turned back to the window, watching the recruits below. The galaxy thought it was getting a small, fragile, unremarkable species when humans achieved interstellar travel. It thought you would be easy to ignore, easy to control, easy to defeat if necessary. He shook his head. The galaxy was wrong. What it got instead was a species that treats pain as a teacher, failure as motivation, and impossible as just another word for not yet achieved. A species that will crawl through fire and ash and broken bones just to prove that someone bet wrong about them. He looked at her with something like respect, or maybe fear. It was hard to tell with Valaxians. "The universe is not ready for humans," he said, "and I suspect humans are just getting started." Katie thought about her father, who had kept fighting until the day he died. She thought about her grandmother, who had worked herself to the bone so her children could have better lives. She thought about every ancestor who had faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. She thought about the small Texas town where she had grown up, where people had told her she was too small and too weak and too female to matter. She thought about all the aliens who had looked at her with pity and contempt, and she smiled. "You are right," she said. "We are just getting started." Then she walked out of the observation post and into the red sunlight of Vexor Prime. Ready for whatever challenge came next. Behind her, Garrick watched her go. And for the first time in 40 years of training soldiers, he felt something he had almost forgotten. Hope. Because if a small, fragile human could accomplish what Katie Morgan had accomplished, then maybe the galaxy was not as hopeless as he had thought. Maybe, just maybe, the universe had finally found the allies it needed. The legend of the human who crawled across the finish line spread through the galaxy in the months that followed. It was told in military academies and training camps. It was discussed in strategic briefings and diplomatic meetings. It became a warning to those who underestimated humanity and an inspiration to those who fought alongside them. And somewhere in the universe, a small human woman continued to fight, continued to push, continued to prove that the only limits that matter are the ones you accept. The instructors had bet she would tap out early. She had conquered the course, breathless, and the galaxy would never forget it.